Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Data Dispatch. Hope everybody is having a wonderful day and had a good weekend. Had some time to mentally distress from the markets because we know that there can be a lot of mental energy that is spent on the markets, especially for traders, compared to long-term portfolio type people. But nonetheless, we're going to be breaking down what's going to be happening this week in terms of events, macroeconomic pieces of data, and how is that going to play into September's seasonality? Because that's the big question. August did close in the green. So is everybody, waiting for a decent pullback in the market? It'll be interesting to see what happens. Typically, though, in the last week, we've seen a decent amount of resiliency. And every time we see a dip in the S&P 500, buying the dip is occurring. Palantir, we'll be talking about that. We have big announcements for Hood. Remember, we saw on Friday S&P 500 inclusion. So congratulations to the bulls out there. We'll be talking about the details regarding that and some of the other stocks I'm keeping on the radar. So if you're a new or returning viewer, hit that like button and subscribe for daily videos. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really love making these videos and then just enjoying the markets with you guys. So pop it up on the screen here. What we see is Palantir closes at 153.11, down about 2% on Friday's close. Where it currently sits is only up about 14 cents, so really not moving over here in the overnight session on Robinhood at 153.25. Talking about Palantir, though, in terms of the zone that it's consolidating in, I think this is incredibly healthy, especially because Palantir recently has had about a 20% dip from this all-time high, about this 189. So considering that it's hanging out here, and one big thing that I am liking in terms of a bullish perspective is that anytime that Palantir dips down here to this 150 zone, you see a decent reversal right away. Buying the dip at 150 occurs, and there's strong bounces at that 150. So I think that's going to be a concrete support level, unless, in terms of that actually being lost, there would have to be some big things happening within Palantir or large shifts in the macroeconomic environment. So right here, Palantir, if we have bullishness, we have a decent, NVIDIA is going to be speaking at an AI conference. We have optimism. If we see resiliency in the market, Palantir could be gearing up to test these 160s again. That's where you're seeing this resistance level. So just trading within this zone, choppiness, trading sideways in September here, kind of basically accumulation. That is what I'm seeing with Palantir right now. Nothing huge. Let's talk about Robinhood. That's what we are seeing. That's a pretty big event for them. They get included into the S&P 500. So congratulations. They closed at about $100 on Friday at 101 right here. Robinhood, talking about concrete support levels, kind of how I mentioned about that 150 level for Palantir. Robinhood has an incredible level of support at that 100. Any dips below that we saw just slightly here at 99, 98, immediately coming back. And then you had the S&P 500 announcement. Robinhood launches up about 8%, 8 to 9% right now at 108.84. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the stock at market open. But what we've seen here in terms of Robinhood was announced in the rebalancing for the S&P 500. Now, when it's actually going to be included is on September 22nd. So it's just a few weeks yet. That's when it's actually going to go live and join the S&P 500 index. Historically, what we've seen when stocks join the S&P is typically about a 5% increase in terms of its valuation. Stock price, we're already seeing that up about 8% right now. But just think of how much more now serious Robinhood is becoming of a company. You're going to have all these different types of index funds tracking the S&P 500, all these various funds that will now be, and people are going to be passively buying Robinhood without even knowing it. So this is going to bring more maturity to Robinhood. This is going to be more concrete strength, keeping me very bullish on Robinhood's future. This is going to get juicy. I think Robinhood here could be testing its all-time highs here in the near future around this 115, 117 point. I think Robinhood could possibly be pushing back up here in the near future. Like I said, depending on the macroeconomic environment. And let's talk about that a little bit right now. Currently, the SPY is up about 80 cents. It's just recently opened, so we see a little bit of some pushing up here, a little bit of momentum. Of course, that's not going to be, a telltale sign of what happens at market open. because last week we did have a decent sell-off at market open, a good gap down. However, in the middle of the week, that was kind of bought back up. And where the S&P 500 sits at right now is pretty much near all-time highs. So at 64.81, we've seen resistance at the 6,500 zone for the index. So at 64.81, came down only about 0.3%. We're seeing choppiness currently in September, which is not a bad thing. If we see choppiness or even a little bit of a cool off, I personally am going to be welcoming that, just because I think that's going to be important in terms of a healthy pullback and gearing up, hopefully, for a year-end rally. That's what a lot of people are anticipating, and I kind of can agree with that in terms of the bullish perspective and just where AI demand is right now, what we're seeing with earnings and company. We're seeing a lot of resiliency in the economy. The big question is what's going to be happening with the key pieces of data that will be coming out that will touch base here, and how is the Fed going to be reacting? Now, investors, what they are awaiting are these two critical inflation reports this week that's going to be giving more insights in terms of the healthiness regarding the economy. That is because we had a pretty weak hiring, a weak jobs data that we saw on Friday, weaker than expected. The producer price index report for August is due on Wednesday, followed by the CPI data that's going to be coming out on Thursday. Now, this data that we saw, the weaker jobs report that we saw on Friday, is helping to reinsure the Fed and also the basically Wall Street and the market, reinsure the probability and the confidence that the Federal Reserve is going to be hopefully lowering the benchmark rate in the September meeting. It'll be interesting to see, and this is kind of the fine balance that we're sitting at right here. We want the Fed to see that the economy, in terms of you're hoping for an interest rate, and a lot of the market is, we want to see the Fed, see that the economy is slowly starting to come to a halt. We're seeing some small signs of weakness in the economy that would help trigger an actual interest rate cut, because there's a lot of debt that needs to be refinanced. We see a big push from the administration. However, we don't want to see data that's going to come that spooks Wall Street, that, oh my gosh, the economy is actually in a much worse position than we were kind of expecting it. It's much worse than we thought, and maybe, hey, it was just a little bit weaker, or maybe slowing down a little bit. That's where I think you could see a reversal or possibly more bearishness into the market. However, it's interesting to see how the administration is reacting regarding this in terms of the numbers that are coming out, calling it either fake, saying, hey, we got to work on the revisions, stuff like that. So there's a lot of kind of politicalness that's coming into this game. That's where I kind of pull back a little bit. I'm just looking to see how is the market going to possibly be reacting to this, and what things am I going to be doing to stay prepared and ahead of the game. Looking here, also, we're going to have the Apple iPhone event with the iPhone 17. We're going to have updates from NVIDIA, Oracle, and GameStop. Apple is expected to unveil the iPhone 17 at an event this week, and NVIDIA, Meta, and Microsoft are among the companies presenting a major technology investment conference. Now, that investment conference is on Monday right here. NVIDIA, AMD, they present at the Goldman Sachs Technology Conference right here. And then you have Meta and Broadcom presenting on Tuesday. So the conference is kind of going throughout the week. You're going to have some key earnings from Oracle. So you're also going to have the CPI data, PPI data, so big pieces of information. Personally, I think the markets could be kind of choppy until we see that, because the market is kind of having difficulty trying to understand where to go right now, because seasonality is playing in the favor of, hey, a pullback, choppiness sideways, in terms of September's historicals, S&P 500 performance. However, we're seeing a lot of resiliency in the market. So that's kind of this fine area that we're sitting at right now. More on that, looking at some of the stocks that I have been keeping an eye on that are starting to drop in price a little bit, and possibly could be decent entries coming up here, but not personally making any entry points right this second. You got ASTS here having a little bit of a head and shoulders formation. It'll be interesting to see if that's validated at 42.41 right here. If that is, if we see further selling pressure, that's where I could see this falling back down here for possibly better entrance. Nebius, what I do like, this gapped up after earnings here. That was was kind of consolidating here in the 50s for a long time. Nebius pushed up here to $70, $75, now back down here to 65. You got Oklo sitting at 70, and CoreWeave now under 90 at $89. We see a lot of insiders selling a decent amount of shares right now after the IPO lockup period. So looking at some of these AI cloud infrastructures, in terms of cloud computing and how AI is being involved in that, CoreWeave and Nebius are big players, and I'm very bullish on the AI compute power and demand in the future. So I'll be keeping close eye on these specific stocks, and of course some of the other big ones that we can talk about, some other videos on the radar. So peace out, take care, and I'll catch you guys later.